the Friend Inside Me fanbase consider Jevil and Spamton as the start of a pattern with the secret bosses, something that I've seen mocked about many fans. Pete and VB, the most popular adaptation of the Woody Theory concept thus far, despite how incredible the animation is, encapsulates this perfectly. I'd go as far as to say that most fans thought that all the secret bosses would be crazy darkness with cryptic dialogue that would try to get us to help them in some way before they'd turn around and try to kill us. The Roaring Knight and Gerson completely shattered this idea, and as the contents of the chapters still settle in, I'm seeing people question why Ram wasn't the secret boss, still holding on to the idea of that pattern we just mentioned. While I still can't completely blame anyone for doing so, Toby has proven to us that the chapters won't be following any sort of pattern. There's a really great video on this that I will also link in the description, but Deltarun's chapters signify one piece of a greater overarching story. So if we're going to be thinking about any theories going forward, we have to stop trying to reference non-existent patterns and start connecting more dots outside of just Chris and the soul. Because while I do think that connection is valid, I don't think Woody Theory holds any ground with just that anymore, especially with all the new information we have. That being said, in the past we have made connections with very little reason for doing so. While I would have loved for Maniac Mike to have been the slam dunk answer that I once thought it was, the Mike Room in Chapter 4 pretty clearly told us that all of our attempts at solving Mike were wrong. Speaking of the Mike Room, I'd like to get that out of the way now, because I've seen a lot of people say that the Mike Room is Woody Theory, but I don't think this was the point at all. The Pippin's dialogue after the boss, at least to me, seemed like Toby was just poking fun at everyone's obsession with Mike and the way we tend to theorize about his game. Friend Cat is also very clearly referenced in the Mike Room, despite the fact that it's very obvious that Friend is a cat and a significant part of Deltarune. Could we still see a character named Mike? Possibly. I still think there's a fair chance that Mike is Friend, but I don't think we should be talking about that in this video, and I won't be making any attempts at naming this cowboy character. But if he's got nothing to do with Mike, we can't look back at the previous secret bosses for any clues. What can we turn to? Was the Cowboy Show's comment from earlier just a throwaway reference to the death of the Westman? Well, my friends inside me, I wondered the same thing. As mentioned previously, the Cowboy segment was entirely present in Chapter 3. Those 2 minutes of mildly entertaining shootout action, entirely intact. Here's where things get interesting. After the second board, if you try to talk to Tenna again after Susie, you get some interesting dialogue. It seems like a whole lot of nothing at first, until...
Still got that he was an idiot who watched it.
Huh. A cowboy show, huh? And the one Chris's dad likes. That's going. The show wasn't cancelled, clearly. Tenna says that they still have the Cowboy Show, right? Doesn't mean anything. This is just an extra piece of lore, no? Like the dialogue before the Cooking and Rhythm games. We were just reading too deep into the whole cancel thing. If only. Some of you already know. Deltarune data miners have found Tenna's third board. It is almost entirely complete, meaning it was likely cut very late in Chapter 3's development. And hey, I know some of you aren't exactly fond of people using unused content as evidence, but just walk with me here. One of the quizzes on this board, get this dialogue. Really? Again, I know unused content, but I really, truly do think that at the very least, you can assume that this fact, that Ascore's favorite cowboy puppet show, being cancelled, is canon. If you find Toby's phrasing from earlier to be suspicious, then you probably think it implies the existence of a cancelled cowboy show. And before the final game, Anna straight up confirms that one existed and was Ascore's favorite. This line is from what would have been the third board, meaning Tenno was only going to find out it was cancelled here, after he mentioned it to Chris. More importantly, though, I'd like to ask you all a question. Why was this ever going to be in the game at all? I mean, this quiz specifically, is this not kind of eerie? This doesn't happen with any other quiz in the game. Not even when Tenno's got the fun gang trapped in plastic balls, losing his goddamn mind. Does this not seem like something that could potentially be relevant later? That just leaves us wondering, when? Well, remember when I said that the key to solving this theory is Asgore? Now's the time. Let's actually talk about Asgore. As most of you, I'm sure, are aware, a lot of people are speculating that Chapter 5 will include a dark world inside Asgore's Flower King shop. For starters, when fighting Gerson in Chapter 4, he runs through the chapters of his series Lord of the Hammer, which we learn is based on the prophecy. Each of the chapters seem to vaguely reflect things we've experienced thus far, but then he goes on to Chapter 5. They're filled with pink and gold. Their vast garden is charred in an inferno of jealousy. What could this mean? Well, where could we see some jealousy in our cast of characters? Noelle, jealous of Chris's bond with Susie? I doubt it, especially after their talk earlier in the chapter. Caddy, jealous of Susie's bond with Noelle? I mean, sure. But what does she have to do with Eagles? Now, Asgore. Not only does he have a very strong reason to be jealous of Sans, but he is literally owner of hometown's flower shop. Furthermore, there's a hidden prophecy depicting Asgore, the Flower Man, trapped in a silo. Not only do we know that Lord of the Hammer was based on the prophecy, but this is very clearly Asgore, right? Notice the crown as well. This isn't Undertale. Asgore doesn't have any sort of crown here. You know who does, though? Oriel. In the Dark World, and Asgore is holding a flower here. Lastly, and most damningly, when separated from Chris as the Soul, take the opportunity to explore through the vents, you discover that Asgore owns a black shard, a weapon that, as far as we are aware, is only dropped by none other than the Roaring Knight. I think that this is implying that Asgore has been to a Dark World before, possibly came face to face with the Roaring Knight, as we had to put up a good fight against it in order to earn that black shard. I mean, Asgore used to be a cop, and Undyne, we're told, has some sort of relationship with the shelter. It's not completely out of the question, right? Perhaps the next chapter, Chapter 5, is when we will see this canceled cowboy show idea capitalized upon. Susie Zilla comment that she makes in passing to Noelle in Chapter 2 could reappear in a debatably significant way. Why couldn't this? Something that, if you believe everything I've told you thus far, has been foreshadowed for quite some time. And besides what Tenno believes to be Asgore's favorite show, we know that Asgore is fond of pop culture. He's not above watching puppet shows in this day and age, and he can genuinely enjoy Mew Mew Kissy Cutie too, and owns comic books that are totally his, considering all of Chris and Asgore's belongings are at their house. But outside of what I'm alleging is foreshadowing and the friend inside me, Chris Soul parallels we've all come to understand, what would really be the point of introducing a character like this, and what significance would it have to Asgore? Let me ask you all another question. Why is this Asgore's favorite show? Why are we given this detail? I mean, think about it. If this was, say, a sneaky reference that Tricky Tony wanted to make to Woody Theory just for the shits, Tenno's question could have been, what popular show got canceled? And the same answer and dialogue afterwards would have worked perfectly. That same. But we were explicitly told that it's Asgore's favorite. Or at least, he intended for us to hear that it was Asgore's favorite. Now, this is gonna sound pretty odd. Just walk with me, okay? Walk with me. I don't think the most important detail about this is the fact that it's a cowboy show, or even the fact that it's Puppet Joe. And the fact that it was canceled. That Asgore's favorite show was canceled. Belton has established that Asgore is someone who holds on to the past to a depressingly obsessive degree. Toriel has rejected the Dreamer name for so long that Miss Toriel has dried up on the whiteboard in her class as if it's been there for years, and Asgore still, as far as we can tell, daily tries to win her over, even after witnessing her laughing it up with Sans in his little grocery store. The guy hides in bushes outside of the church she attends just to try and fail to give her flowers. Even outside of this, if we assume all of his crazy Pepe Sylvia corkboard ramblings have to do with Des, which they most likely do, he's been desperately searching even harder than Noelle just to try and get things back to how they were in the past.
Just hope that it's all back to below we have.
I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm crazy, like every other friend inside fanatic, but something about Asgore clinging on to his favorite old canceled show is seriously a character for him. And I think this would be especially hammered home if the show was in black and white. I mean, this is Woody theory after all. The whole point is to draw connections back to Woody's Roundup from Toy Story 2, right? And truth be told, it's honestly the last major aspect of the show we meant to draw a connection to. Now, this might be a reach. I'm saying that most of this theory is reaching, but could you imagine TV in Asgore's shop is a black and white television? And that this cowboy puppet show, like Woody's Roundup, is also in black and white? There's a piece of Shudder dialogue that I haven't seen many people talk about that I think could possibly be noteworthy for our purposes here.
You know, once upon a time, there was a land like purple cliffs, a frozen waste, water. This theater was built upon it. It grew. Everyone liked the change. Some people left. There was the days of the black and white.
Now, at first glance, you might take note of this line, seemingly calling back to Undertale's key locations. It's noted Waterfall and Hotlands. But I just like to look at this dialogue in the context of the Light World. What if this line is referring to when the TV set was installed in the Dreamer living room? We know that actions in the Light World will translate to history within the Dark World in mysterious ways, so it isn't entirely out of the question. Maybe, originally, the TV that was installed was in black and white, and "it grew" refers to when that TV was replaced with the one we know as Tenna, the TV that is noticeably bigger than the one in Asgore's shop. Besides, for someone who can barely afford rent, where's he getting a TV from unless it was donated to him or something, or he found it in an alleyway? But something tells me that sentimental Asgore would hold on to something as pointless to own as a black and white TV in the 21st century that reminded him of when things were normal. But then again, that's all speculation. Who says that the cowboy show has to be in black and white anyway? It doesn't have to be one-to-one with Woody's Roundup. It's not like posting Kickstarter this entire Descent into Madness didn't have a black and white photo of Woody. In summary, this is what I like to call EO Woody theory. I believe that in Chapter 5, we will get to see a cowboy character from Asgore's favorite cancelled, maybe black and white television show, and Asgore will be very fond of him. I believe there is opportunity for him to be a secret boss. However, I'd like us to take the opportunity to imagine what this character would be like as a main antagonist in the same way as King, Queen, and Tenna. Maybe even some kind of Ram-esque ally, albeit much, much creepier. Especially as the Chris Soul dynamic creeps further and further into the limelight, it'd be interesting to see this highlighted in a much more significant way in the Dark World outside of a secret boss battle. I also think this character will serve to contribute to what I believe the form of escapism will be in Chapter 5, as that is a relevant theme, in my opinion, even after chapters were released. So far we've seen card games and toys, the internet, television, and religion. Chapter 5 very well could be nostalgia, escapism to one's past. They'd also likely reflect Chris to an extent, being a puppet and all. The friend inside them could still be a speaker of some kind with a good old Sheriff Woody pull string. How did we get here? All this because Tennis said it was Asgore's favorite. Thanks for listening to my demented ramblings. Hopefully this fulfilled some sense of hope and woody theory for some of you. Unfortunately, though, I'm afraid this theory will just be forgotten to time by most, so think of this as a final strand of cope as we say goodbye. I mean, unless we get some direct connection between cowboys and flowers, we can't... Wait. Floral, cowboy, bat curtains. Floral, cowboy, bat curtains. Oh my god! Okay, that's really it this time. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if I should ever take a shot at this again, or if I should just leave the theorizing to the theorists. But, anywho, just remember that we're all in this together, and no matter who's right and who's wrong, we're all going to be blown away by the end product regardless. Chapters 3 and 4 were incredible. I really cannot wait until we get to see what's in store next year. Lastly, I want to just give a huge thanks to Spaceboy and CyberGhost. Spaceboy made this cool thumbnail that I threw up in the video earlier that you saw, and out of a chicken scratch sketch that I sent them to. If you want to see that, here it is. It's ridiculous. CyberGhost convinced me to use a cross arms rant sona for this video, and he made the art for these little, these little poses. So, yeah, big thanks to you guys. You're awesome. Anyway, that being said, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for watching, and have a good
So the insta-kill's just gonna keep happening.
Welcome to the Rooster. Very well. Is there anything else I can help you? Oh, I'll call the doctor at once. I'll call the doctor at once. Very well. Then allow me to show you to your room.
What is the difference between a mathematician and an engineer? I promise this has to do with math eventually. The answer lies in this old parable.
Well,
If you asked both an engineer and a mathematician to take a picture of a giraffe, the engineer would probably fly over to Africa with a camera, find an area with lots of giraffes, and take a picture of them. The mathematician would first lock themselves in their study for weeks, maybe months, and eventually hand you a thick stack of papers proving that giraffes do exist. Ha ha ha! Look at how silly those mathematicians are, doing all that work to prove something when they could have just gone out and used their eyeballs. Unless, of course, the task was slightly different. What if, instead of a giraffe, they were asked to take a picture of a living Tyrannosaurus Rex? This time, the engineer would be wandering the earth with their camera for all time, searching and searching and searching, all while the mathematician sits at home, having already proved the task impossible. Ever since the game first came out 11 years ago, collective days, maybe decades of human existence have been spent trying to solve FNAF. And as an engineer myself, I respect the hustle. But today, I will not be solving FNAF. Instead, I will walk the path of the mathematician and prove that Five Nights at Freddy's cannot be solved. Richard, cue that intro. Before we can definitively prove whether or not FNAF is solvable, we must first
I don't
make the
fucking
question
understand the
of what it
movement
really
pattern of these
means to
dinosaurs.
solve something. Well, in the world of mathematics, a problem is solved when there exists one single verified solution. If a problem provably has no solution or has more than one valid solution, then it is unsolvable. And for those who don't know, math has been around for a while, I'd say, and over the many years, mathematicians have developed a foolproof method for finding and verifying solutions. Now, clearly, Five Nights at Freddy's isn't a simple math problem, and using some basic arithmetic to try and make sense of all of this nonsense might seem like a fool's errand. But I assure you, I am no fool. Even if we can't use the exact same arithmetic techniques to figure out exactly how many people are named Jeremy in this series, we should be able to use the same principles to definitively solve everything. How hard could it be? The first step is to define the problem. After all, it's pretty hard to solve a problem if you don't know the problem you're trying to solve. In math, your problem could range from a simple equation to some insane, abstract, 8-dimensional geometry space. But just to demonstrate how everything works, I'll use a very simple algebra problem. 3x minus 6 equals 0. In this case, x is our unknown variable. In order for this problem to solve, we need to resolve every unknown in the equation. Basically, what number can we fill in for x to make this true? In FNAF, there's a lot of unknowns over 100 15 to 30 minute game theory episodes worth of unknowns. In fact, if you look at any comment section for any FNAF video on the internet, you could probably argue that there are no knowns, so that does complicate things just a little bit, but we'll get back to that later. The next step is to define your axioms. Now, these are statements that you assume to be true
even do anything this
without needing a formal proof.
You fucker.
They're basically just math's way of saying, just go with it, so you don't have to reinvent all of math every time you calculate a tip. One example might be Euclid's parallel postulate, which says that if two angles in a shape like this add up to less than 180 degrees, those two lines will eventually meet on that side. You can't necessarily prove this. It's more the cornerstone that you use to prove everything else. Now, if the realization that all of math is built on inherently improvable statements that, if wrong, could shatter our understanding of reality as we know it, is filling you with some deep existential dread, don't worry! The cool thing about axioms is that you can sometimes choose to just ignore them. You can assume that the parallel postulate is true and solve problems in the good old Euclidean geometry that you're probably familiar with, or you could put on your punk rock glasses, chuck that postulate out the window, and join Einstein in the world of non-Euclidean geometry. They're kind of like the rules for Uno. Some of them are set in stone. And then there's some other optional
Fucking
ones
lowers
that
our hit rate, leaves, refuses to elaborate.
That are fun. So then, what are our FNAFxions? Really thought that one would roll off the tongue a little bit. What are some objectively true statements that we can make about this story that we can build the rest of our solution upon? Like I said, there aren't that many, but we do know for certain that, for example, 5 children were murdered in the restaurant from the first game. Oh, okay, no, I'm seeing the comments now. Some people don't agree on that one. Okay, well that's fine. But we do know that this purple guy is a man named William Afton. No, okay, no. Some people are making some surprisingly compelling arguments against that one too. All right, that's fine. FNAFxiom number 1. This guy's name is Fred. We can all agree on that, right? Seriously? No? Okay, all right. So some factors. Once you have your axioms defined, the next step is to simplify the problem. Break something complex down into simpler subcomponents. Going back to our sample equation from before, we've got 2 operations going on: multiplication and addition. But we can simplify it by subtracting 6 from both sides, something we know we can do based on our axioms. Now we have a much simpler equation with only 1 operation. So, how do we simplify FNAF? Well, maybe instead of trying to completely solve every little detail and name and strange minigame, we can focus on solving just one part. Like, say, the timeline. Which game happens when? Should be simple enough. After that, you can attempt to construct a proof by, well, actually solving the problem. It's finally time to figure out what x could be, such that when you multiply it by 3, you get 6. An easy way to do this is by solving the problem backwards. In math, the opposite of multiplication is division. So if we just divide 6 by 3, we can find that x must be equal to 2. 3 times 2 equals 6.
Maybe I can handle one.
Propose a simple timeline for the first 5 mainline FNAF games. First comes FNAF 4, where we see William's son get killed by an animatronic. This inspires William to start experimenting with ghost magic, leading to the Funtime animatronics from Sister Location. But oopsie, this time William's daughter gets killed in another freak animatronic-related accident, leading William to start murdering a whole bunch of kids with good old-fashioned. Years later, his oldest son discovers all of his father's dastardly deeds, and FNAF 1, 2, and 3 show him traveling around to all the different haunted pizzerias to make amends, ending with him burning his dad alive. There's also a rabbit, I guess. Yes, I know, a lot of you are fuming about how wrong this is. Hold your comments for a second, I'm proving a point. Once you have a solution, the last step is to verify your solution by checking for any contradictions. If we plug 2 in for x in our original equation, we can confirm that 2 times 3 minus 6 does indeed equal 0. No contradictions here. So, are there any contradictions in this FNAF timeline? Yes, we placed FNAF 4 before Sister Location because we assumed that the death of William's youngest son motivated him to start studying ghost magic, which led him to make the Funtime animatronics. However, in FNAF 4, we also hear William warn his youngest son to remember what he saw, and encourages him to stay far away from the animatronics. This seems to be a reference to his daughter's death in Sister Location. William is warning his son to stay away because one of these animatronics already killed one of his kids. So that would put Sister Location before FNAF. But if that's the case, then it would mean that William started building animatronics to study ghost magic before any of his kids had died, which wouldn't make any sense. He would have no motivation to do so. So Sister Location cannot come before FNAF 4, but FNAF 4 also can't come before Sister Location. We have ourselves a contradiction. Now, one contradiction doesn't mean a problem is definitively unsolvable. Perhaps one of our FNAXiums is incorrect, perhaps there's an additional variable that we haven't yet accounted for, but again, I promise, we will come back to them. And now it's time... Oh shoot, come back to them. Right, so, admittedly, this little exercise wasn't as helpful as I thought. Using this process to solve a simple algebra problem with one variable is pretty easy. But FNAF has a few more than just one variable. But that's okay. Just because a problem is complicated doesn't mean it's unsolvable. Thus is the holy power of math. With enough tenacity and wit, no problem is too complicated to be solved. Not even math will prevail. The real issue is this. Problems with a lot of variables will always require more information to solve. And conversely, the more equations you have, the more unknown variables you can solve for. And sure, FNAF does have a lot of unknowns, but it also has a lot of equations. I mean, it's got a million games, books, Sudokus, movies, whatever this is. Surely, in all of this, there must be some system of equations that we can use to solve FNAF, right? Well, I mean, there are some equations in here that we can get pretty definitive answers from. And then there's some more down here that kind of just have a big shrug emoji next to them. I wasn't really sure if I should count those or not. And then up here, some other people, they wrote some more equations, and I'm not sure if they're connected to the same problem or if it's just they're doing their own thing. And then over there, someone tried to erase something and write something else on top of it. You still kind of see it. So does that count or not? And then someone just drew a Stussy down there. Look, I'll be honest. My original plan for this video was to solve FNAF like a mathematician. I wanted to be the one to come up with a definitive, provable solution to this story, based on hard facts, evidence, and mathematical rigor. I wanted to be the guy to unironically write solved in big green letters on the thumb. And I tried, man. I really tried to find a system of literary equations in all this chaos. But I couldn't. Hell, I couldn't even prove whether or not a solution even exists. There is somehow not enough information and too much information. I applied all the mathematical rigor that I possibly could, and it didn't work. And I don't know why. Math was created to solve any problem that can be solved, and weed out the ones that can't. And this is a problem, and if math cannot solve it one way or the other, then that would mean that math is wrong. And I built my whole life around math, and if it's wrong, then everything's wrong, and that can't be right. There must be something that I'm missing here, but I can't tell what it is, and it's driving me crazy. Richard, cut the camera. Well, folks, I've taken some time to reevaluate my process, and after a mild existential crisis, my assistant Richard pointed something out to me that I had not considered before. FNAF is not a system of rigid equations. It is a story. It is a piece of human expression. Of course it could not be solved with mathematical logic. It's art. In order to find deeper meaning, you must engage with it on a personal and emotional level. That is the only path to true understanding. And I told him, Richard, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Can't be solved with math. Don't be stupid. That's stupid. But while he was flapping his gums, I did realize my true mistake. And see, I made a slight error when going through this process for 5 Nights at Freddy's. Now, the issue didn't lie in some contradiction or proposed solution or even a faulty FNAF seal. No. The problem lay the problem itself. I attempted to solve the story of 5 Nights at Freddy's by defining it as a system of equations with unknown variables. But I see now the error of my ways. I was still walking the path of the engineer. 5 Nights at Freddy's is not a system of equations. And it's also not a story. See, a story is a sequence of events. It needs to have some sort of narrative progression, and it needs to have continuity. Otherwise, it would just be a series of disjointed ideas. Take something like Star Wars. These movies and shows are all happening in the same continuous world. Events from one can ripple into another. But all the older comics and games don't take place in that same world. Even if they feature the same characters and locations, they don't take place in the same continuity. They don't count towards the larger story. This is often referred to as the canon of a story. Now, FNAF has always been a bit muddled in this regard. Sure, in the beginning, it was a simple sequence of games that all took place in the same world. But now we have novels, movies, books based on games, games based on books, and it's never super clear what counts and what doesn't. Does FAT2 really exist in the same world as FNAF 2? Can we use details from the books to make inferences about the games? And if so, how can we tell which details we can use? This makes it very hard to make confident statements about this story because it has no clear continuity. Modern FNAF is no longer a single story. Structurally, it's much more similar to a mythology. Picture, if you will, an alternate universe where instead of games, a young Matthew Patrick started Greek Theory, a channel all about unraveling the mysteries of the Greek gods and really good salads. And say he wanted to create a definitive timeline for all of Greek mythology. Well, it would start off pretty easy. You got your titans, your gods, your demigods. But as he dug deeper, he would start to come across some strange contradictions. In one story, Aphrodite is said to be the daughter of Zeus and Dione. But in another, she's said to have been born of the sea foam, and before you know it, you'd start seeing thumbnails that looked like this. These contradictions arise because Greek mythology is not a single story written by a single person. It is a constantly evolving world where different authors give their own interpretation of its cast of characters, without much regard for what anyone else is writing. There is no single continuity, and your interpretation will vary depending on which stories you choose to look at. Sure, FNAF started out as the passion project of a single man with a single vision who's maybe just winging it the whole time, but nowadays there are dozens of people all working and contributing to this world, and they will all naturally have their own interpretations and intentions for the stories they tell. Some authors might want to try to clarify or explore misunderstood details from the games, and others might want to go completely off the rails and write something about a magical cloning goop. And sure, Scott might have his hand in all of them, but even he's admitted in interviews that there have been cases where he didn't explain things properly to his collaborators or forgot certain details of his own story. You all remember that one box? Turns out the only thing in there was Schrodinger's cat, because not even Scott remembers what it was supposed to be. These different mediums are like Euclid's parallel postulate. You can choose to take every bit of FNAF media as completely canon, or you can choose to look at only the games. Both would result in a completely different story, but both are equally correct. There is no one provably singular solution to this story. Remember well the folly of the engine. This whole time, we've been trying to find a solution to the story of FNAF, when we should be asking if the story even existed in the first place. So, there you have it. Definitive proof that FNAF is unsolvable. Tune in next week, where I solve FNAF. And a huge thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Alakazam, Athel102, Big Dog Tie for the Win, Captain Kirby, Zidian, Sherry and Mark, Stylish, The Boss Killer 94, Ty Studio, Tricks of Crows, and did you know that the character limit on Patreon is very high? Well, it is high enough, in fact, that I can name myself M.
Here you go. Thanks for the business. Let me have a look.
Ah, hello everyone. Won't you please accept this? I am at your service. Yes, at once. Is there anything else? I shall await your return.
Welcome to the roof. Very well. A quick rest, right? Of course.
Since the advent of the Link era, column placement has become an integral part of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was only a matter of time before Konami started pumping out card designs based around this new facet of the game. However, not all of these column-based cards have been winners. Enter the S-Force, one of the many archetypes made to capitalize on this new design space to disastrous results. The S-Force are a security force led by S-Force Justify, who's the deck's main boss monster. In lore, they're enemies of the Psi Frames and the Time Thieves, criminal groups within the game's lore. As cool as that is, it doesn't really affect how the deck plays. To see what the deck's identity is, we should take a look first at the wave of support it received in Blazing Vortex, and more specifically, S-Force Rampa Chiyomaru, arguably the most important card in the deck. You may recognize her as the girl that became one of the most broken Link 2s ever printed. Anyways, this is a level 2 Dark Warrior with a modest 800 attack and 1000 defense. It is the effect where any monster your opponent controls in the same column as an S-Force monster you control can only attack that monster. As a quick effect, you can banish an S-Force card from your hand to bounce Chiyomaru
generic extra
and
deck
summon
removal,
any S-Force monster from
which
your
has
deck.
always been
This is your main playmaker,
a nice and
as well as
healthy
an
thing when those
demonstration of the
cards see
two
a
main
lot of
gimmicks of the S-Force
extra deck
cards.
usage.
One is a series of floodgate-style effects centered around entirely columns, mainly debuffing your opponent's monsters that are in the same column as your S-Force monsters. The other gimmick is banishing S-Force monsters from your hand to pay for costs. The S-Force monsters have a wide variety of floodgate effects across their monsters. For example, in the first wave of support, they received S-Force Gravitino, which makes it so that any monster in the same column as an S-Force gets banished
what
without leaving the
it
field.
should more
S-Force
accurately
Dog
be
Tag, which makes it so that monsters in the same column as your S-Force
called
monsters can't activate effects during your main phase. And S-Force Edge Razor, which makes it so that any monster sharing a column with an S-Force can't be used as a link material for a Link 3 or higher monster. These column-based floodgates were the main draw of the deck, of course, but it also had a few playmakers to try and allow the deck to summon its boss monster, S-Force Justify. This is a Link 3 with all upward pointing arrows. It requires 3 effect monsters, one of which has to be an S-Force, and has 2 effects. The first effect allows you to target and negate one effect monster your opponent controls, and then move it to a zone Justify it's pointing to. The second effect allows it to banish all monsters it's pointing to whenever it attacks before damage calculation. This is, overall, a fine boss monster, with its main flaw simply being that it always requires 3 monsters to summon, so it's difficult to link climb into. The deck also has some fine spell and trap card support. Bridgehead not only has its effect to protect your monsters from battle, it also adds an S-Force monster from deck to hand on activation. S-Force Showdown allows you to special summon a banished S-Force or add an S-Force from grave to hand. S-Force Chase allows you to target face-up cards your opponent controls, up to the number of S-Force monsters you control with different names, and bounce all of them. It can also banish itself from the graveyard whenever you need to banish an S-Force card from hand for one of your card effects. Finally, S-Force Specimen allows you to summon an S-Force monster from your grave, or from your banishment to a column your opponent has a monster in. It can also be banished from grave to let you move an S-Force monster from one monster zone to another. It seems like, overall, the S-Force were ready for action. So, why did this deck fail? Well, there were a few issues. For one, the deck didn't really have much actual playmaking potential. When I said Chiyomaru was the best card of the deck, that wasn't meant as a compliment to the card's amazing potential as a starter. It's more that most of the other cards in the archetype did very little. In the first wave of support, there were only 4 monsters in the S-Force with the ability to special summon themselves or other cards, and unfortunately, they weren't all that. Besides Chiyomaru, you had Dog Tag, Edge Razor, and Platina. Dog Tag had the effect to special summon itself from your hand when your opponent normal or special summoned a monster, which is cool, but not consistent for making plays. Edge Razor allows you to special summon any S-Force from your hand when it was summoned, which is legitimately helpful. Finally, if you had Platina, you could special summon a banished S-Force when it was normal or special summoned. None of the other S-Force monsters could special summon themselves or any other cards, and your spells and traps weren't much help. Showdown, only being able to special summon banished S-Force monsters is a real headache, as it can lead to a lot of awkward hands where you have an S-Force in hand or in your graveyard, and you really want to get back for a play, but are completely unable to interact with. The end result is that the deck has very few hands that can summon its boss monster in turn 1, and even if you can get that far, you won't have any extension past that point. To even get to justifying your first turn, you need to find Chiyomaru,
and either Edge Razor or Showdown and another S-Force monster on your first turn. You can't even use Edge Razor to summon Gravitino and then add Showdown because you won't have any way to banish an S-Force monster to get back with Showdown in the first place. Generic extra deck options likely won't help either, because Justify's strict summoning requirements mean that link climbing isn't an option. Now, not being able to make your boss monster on the first turn may not be that big of a deal if your main deck monsters are capable of fending for themselves in the meantime. However, even if you don't go for Justify, you're not going to be putting up very impressive boards. That leads into the second issue with the archetype, which is that the column-based mechanic is very easy to play around. If you look at the floodgate effects of cards like Edge Razor or Gravitino, you'll notice that they all share a very specific condition. Every single one of these effects only works on monsters in the same column as your S-Force cards. This means that certain combos can play around your floodgates entirely by simply playing their cards in the other two zones. Sure, with Chiyomaru and Bridgehead combined, you can make most of your monsters immune to battle destruction by forcing all of your opponent's monsters to attack monsters Bridgehead is protecting, but that only applies if they summon their boss monster in one of those affected zones. If they manage to summon a monster large enough to beat over your monster by battle in a zone you couldn't put a monster into, you'll be hung up to dry. The spell and trap card support helps a bit, but it can't cover for this glaring weakness entirely. While Specimen can let you play around this counterplay, all it's effectively doing is allowing your cards to function properly as opposed to simply failing outright. That's also assuming you could put Specimen into the graveyard that quickly anyway, which is unlikely because it will only activate one of its effects per turn. So if you used it earlier that turn to move monsters back, it won't even be on. And again, this is all assuming you're able to get 3 S-Force monsters onto the field on turn 1 with the effects that your opponent would need to play around, which isn't going to be the case very often because the floodgate effects on the S-Force cards are pretty awful. We've been dancing around this point for a bit, but the potential for disruption on the S-Force monsters is laughably low. Remember, this was released in 2021. Around this time, decks like Virtual World and Drytron were out and very playable. Many of these floodgates are more minor annoyances.
And Mewtwo wasn't out until way later.
Dog Tag only stops your opponent from activating monster effects during your main phase, so your opponent can combo unimpeded. This would actually be pretty useful still if Dog Tag can be summoned during your turn easily, but for some reason its summoning condition makes it the easiest to summon during your opponent's turn when it doesn't do anything. Gravitino's banishing effect could mess with your opponent, but you either have to successfully remove your opponent's cards, or your opponent has to play them into your board poorly for it to ever come up. It's strong when you're already in a good position, or when combined with S-Force Chase to turn its bounce into banishing, but that can be difficult to properly set up. S-Force Orifice prevents your opponent from targeting their own monsters instead of protecting your monsters from targeting, like basically any archetype would do, which only matters in very specific situations. Funnily enough, it did have some applications against Virtual World, as their cards had to target their own cards to function. But that's the only deck around this time where this effect would even theoretically be live, and even then, it was easily played around. It also has a removal effect, which isn't awful, but that's the only value it's really providing you because the floodgate effect will very rarely come up. Edge Razor stopping your opponent from link climbing above a link rating of 3 is potentially very strong, but you have to bet on your opponent specifically playing links. Any Synchro, Xyz, or Fusion archetype will just laugh you off completely. So, as strong as this could be, it's more of a silver bullet effect than a consistent form of disruption. The worst of all of these so-called floodgates has to be S-Force Professor D-Gamma, who has the amazing effect of preventing your opponent from changing their monster's battle positions, but only if they're in the same column as an S-Force monster. Could you imagine the horror if D-Gamma's effect hit the entire board and not only the column you had already summoned a monster to? I could, because Final Attack Orders has been in the game for years and hasn't been playable in decades. It doesn't get better for S-Force anytime soon though, because on top of having bad floodgate effects, the deck also has very little it can do to protect these cards in the first place. Outside of Bridgehead's awkward battle protection that can easily be played around if you don't have Chiyomaru exactly in play, the deck has basically no cards that can protect its board. This is especially bad because a lot of these monsters are actually pretty easy to just beat over in battle. The highest stat on any of these monsters is a mere 2600 on S-Force Justify. Most of the others have attack and defense stats capping out at around 2200. And yeah, attack and defense stats matter very little in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, but that's usually because players are consistently summoning boss monsters with 3000 or more attack, which, as we've covered, the S-Force are quite bad at. This means that a lot of the so-called S-Force end boards lose to a normal summon Berserk Gorilla, let alone any cards that are actually good. In fact, your entire deck has basically no answer to any interaction that comes in the form of back row. Spell and trap cards will be able to remove your cards with complete impunity, and even your boss monster is completely unable to stop them. This alone would be enough to make the deck quite bad. But there's one additional flaw of S-Force that makes it a truly bad archetype. This is a strange weakness to pin down, but a big problem with S-Force is that the cards just don't do anything near powerful enough to warrant trying to play them. It has some good cards. Chiyomaru is a good and surprisingly flexible starter, especially for a deck that can recur its monsters from banishment as easily as this deck can. S-Force Justify is a good boss monster that synergizes with the deck very well. While not stellar, S-Force Showdown and Chase are good back row support that you could at least play to be searched off of Gravitino. However, these are all of the best cards in the archetype, and none of them are exceptional. Worse, they're actively dragged down by the rest of the mediocre to outright bad cards that you have to play to enable them. The Floodgate effects aren't just easy to play around, they're outright weak effects. The monsters are clunky and often actively don't synergize with each other or even themselves properly. The deck is a bunch of bad cards with a few serviceable enablers sprinkled in, and this will prove to be the main problem that S-Force would have going forward. And that covers this state of the S-Force at the time of release and into the immediate future. However, they did get more support down the line. S-Force Retroactive and S-Force Lapsawell were printed in Battle of Chaos, and S-Force Night Chaser was printed a year later in Cyberstorm Access. These cards are all generally strong, so let's look at them in more detail to see if they can save this failing archetype. Retroactive is a level 1 warrior with 0 attack and defense. If you would use a monster in your field to link summon an S-Force Link monster, you can use it in your hand as a material. During the main phase, you can return it from your field to your hand to summon a level 2 or higher S-Force monster from your hand. And if you would banish an S-Force monster from your hand as a cost for an S-Force effect, you can banish it from your graveyard instead. Retroactive is a great extender for the archetype, making your combos far more consistent to pull off. The other two effects allow the deck to generate far more value with its effects, as well as being even more flexible by allowing you to pivot in and out of specific monsters. Lapsawell is a level 6 with 2400 attack and 2500 defense. When special summoned, it allows you to special summon an S-Force monster from your graveyard. And it has the effect where, during your main phase, you can banish an S-Force from your hand to destroy all monsters in the same column as your
that
S-Force
description
monsters.
is wrong.
This makes
It's
your
not
game plan
lowering
far
our
more
new
consistent.
Grimoire
Now
stones,
you can
it's
summon something
lowering
on your
even
Chiyomaru
our
that reborns
equipped
from the
ones
grave
too.
instead of banishment, which allows you to extend in far more situations and leads to more plays. It's also another form of removal besides Justify or Chase in the archetype, allowing you to out your opponent's board in more ways. Finally, we have Night Chaser, a frankly absurd Link 1 monster. It points straight down and requires a non-Link S-Force monster to be made. It prevents your opponent's monsters from attacking any monsters in the same column as them. So, if you want to make a worse Dewfront lock in Decade Late, you can combine this with Chiyomaru. However, it also has the effect where you can target one of your S-Force monsters and shuffle it into the deck to special summon an S-Force from your banishment. This card basically completely outmoded Platina as the deck's premier way to recur monsters from the banish zone. It's exceptionally easy to make, and even better, it can be activated as a quick effect, allowing you to recur more value over several turns by recurring a once per turn effect during your opponent's turn without having to rely on Chiyomaru, because honestly, Chiyomaru can't be the only one doing the heavy lifting in this archetype. All around, these cards make the S-Force deck far more flexible and consistent. Retroactive allows you to actually make your boss monster consistently. Lapsawell means that Justify isn't your only answer to threats your opponent summons, and Night Chaser is honestly a pretty insane Link 1 to print for any deck that wants to banish its own cards. However, none of them fix the final issue with this deck, which is that it just doesn't do anything. You still can't extend enough to make an imposing board. Your Floodgate effects are still pitifully weak and easy to play around, and you're not generating tons of card advantage or anything like that to attract players to the strategy. Fundamentally, there's just no reason to play S-Force. With all of this in mind, how could we improve the strategy? Well, there are a number of decks and cards based around columns that we can look at to see where things went wrong. The first, well, many people will go to, are the Magnets. These are an archetype of card with the effect where if there are 2 or more cards in the same column, you can special summon this card to that column. Additionally, multiple members of the archetype had effects that cared about what columns they were in, such as Mech Knight Red Moon, which could destroy a monster in the same column, or Mech Knight Blue Sky, which could add Mech Knights from deck to hand, equal to the number of cards your opponent controls in the same column as Blue Sky. This deck had a much easier time getting its column set up, because as long as you had any spell or traps in your hand, you could always at least set one of those in the same column as an opponent's monster, or set a spell or trap card and summon the Mech Knight that way. Another similar card is Iron Dragon Taimoton. While more niche, this is a much more powerful card that cannot be normal summoned or set, but can special summon itself as long as there are 3 more cards in a single column. When special summoned this way, it destroys all other cards in its column. And then, neither player can use zones in the same column as Taimoton. This is a bit of a niche card, but when you can get it to work, it's kind of a blowout. These are at least some ideas for things that you could do with S-Force better. At least some of the S-Force cards could be given summoning conditions similar to Mech Knights or Iron Dragon. Maybe they could summon themselves to a column with a monster your opponent controls with certain characteristics, high enough level, high enough attack points, or maybe a monster special summon from the extra deck. This could give the deck far more extension. Another idea is to make the S-Force effects more proactive. S-Force all being based around floodgates mean that, if you're going second and can't make S-Force Justify or S-Force Lapis well, you can't out your opponent's board. Considering that the deck already has a theme of summoning cards on your opponent's turn with Retroactive and Geomaru, S-Force cards that destroy cards in their column, or negate the effects of cards in their column on their summon could be extremely powerful in the archetype. Another direction you could take is based around how they like banishing their own cards. The Molasses archetype is based around banishing their own cards, and while we shouldn't push this deck as hard as that deck was, considering how strong Molasses has been, some of the designs could be transferred over to S-Force successfully. Cards like Molasses in the Mirror have an effect that triggers when you're banished. In this case, to banish another Molasses card from the graveyard that can add a Molasses card of the same type from deck to hand. Most of their monsters also have an effect to summon themselves from banishment. This makes the deck far more powerful, though it may be a bit too good of an effect to slap onto your cards. Not to mention, this archetype has cards like Night Chaser that summon your banished monsters already. So it would be really weird to give the deck new cards that don't actually work with the best cards currently in the archetype. The Molasses in the Mirror example would be more at home in an S-Force deck. The final way you can make the deck better is also one that people would probably enjoy the least, and that's to make the floodgates on the S-Force monster stronger. Even if it's difficult to summon them out, if getting a board of 4 S-Force monsters actually prevented your opponent from making powerful plays, the deck would be a lot stronger. Of course, the last time we had a floodgate-based archetype be good was Kashtira, and that deck locked 9 of your opponent's zones and then made a Macrocosmos, which led to the Yu-Gi-Oh community being somewhat upset, to put it mildly. So this probably isn't the best idea. This would also be a nightmare to balance, because if you stick to the column-based gimmick, it would still be really hard to balance. More likely than not, your opponent would either be able to just completely ignore the restrictions, or would be completely unable to play around them, leading to pretty awful games. This is an on-theme way of making the S-Force better, but it's probably not the best idea either when other, better avenues are available. So the S-Force are a series of cards that are, overall, far too weak. Their main gimmicks are inherently difficult to make work, as your opponent will always have far too much counterplay, as they control where they summon their monsters, not you. On top of that, they had very few good cards in the archetype that were only good and not exceptional. Overall, the deck did far less than the competition for far more work. Later support increased the deck's consistency and power dramatically, but it didn't raise the ceiling of the deck's power enough to make it more viable. There are several other avenues that Konami could go down for making support, but without them printing enough new maintenance cards to essentially replace most of the main monsters, it probably won't be enough to save this failing archetype.
Ayoko na! Break na tayo!
this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 1, Pot of Greed. Pot of Greed is a normal spell that allows you to draw 2 cards. That's it. All it does. So why did it get banned? Well, here's the thing. In Yu-Gi-Oh, the resources are the cards in your hand. Pot of Greed's ability to give you 2 resources for completely free was incredibly powerful. And think about what you were drawing into. Cards like Delinquent Duo, Graceful Charity, Snatch Steal, Heavy Storm, Raigeki, all cards that can completely turn the game around all by themselves. Games would just evolve into 2 more power spells, and Pot of Greed was not only one of them, it potentially got more of them. The card was banned in 2005 and has stayed there ever since. Does this card come back? Oh, no. Yu-Gi-Oh has progressed to a point where basically every card is a power spell. Imagine you spend 2 to 3 hand traps to try and stop your opponent's plays, and then you just drop Pot of Greed and go full combo anyway. Yeah, that was just a bad example. Instead, think about how Pot of Greed just straight up makes every single hand better for having. It just gets you 2 more cards, and when every card in your deck is good and worth drawing, you always provide value. And not because it's a +1, the cards it draws you will plus you even more, or disrupt your opponent from plussing themselves. The card would only serve to make games feel more swingy, and benefits going first far more than anything else, which we do not need any more of. All of them. Why are these Yu-Gi-Oh cards banned? Part 2. The Handwritten Trio. Universal Sentry, Confiscation, let you look at your opponent's hand, then rip a card out. Duo rips 1 card at random, and 1 of the opponent's choice. So why do they get banned? Simply ripping cards out of your opponent's hand is a broken effect. Confiscation and Universal Sentry's ability to provide full hand knowledge on your opponent was incredible. Not only could you just take away their best card, you knew exactly what else they had and how to play around it. Delinquent Duo was bad too, because it just straight up traded 2 for 1 for basically nothing. It got so bad that players would set very important cards like Dark Hole or Raigeki, allowing them to rub any removal card, just so they wouldn't get ripped by one of these cards. In 2006, all 3 of these cards were banned and have stayed there ever since. Could these cards come back? Oh no! If a card like a Pointer of the Red Lotus, which is strictly worse than all 3 of these cards, is currently banned, then there's no chance any of these could ever come off. Going first is already strong, but being able to rip hand traps out of your opponent's hand is just infuriating. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Eric the Fleur is a level 10 synchro monster with generic materials and free effects. On any card field, return itself to the extra deck during the type phase from a level 9 or lower monster, and also it has an option. Why did it get banned? Simple. Baron was too strong for how generic it is. Granted, Baron wasn't banned because its own effects were too strong, and more so the fact that it was so easily comboed with other generic negates to create unbreakable defense. Decks like Super Heavy Samurai, Vanadium, and more recently Snake Eyes flood their field with generic negate cards and stop your opponent. Like, could this card come back? No. Aside from the aforementioned incident, Baron also caused every synchro deck to feel the same. It always ended on Baron, Overload, and maybe your own boss monster if you opened well enough. It was unreasonable to compare other synchros to Baron, and as such, all obsolete. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 4. Fiber Jar. Fiber Jar is a flip monster that juggles all cards from the hand and graveyard, and then draws both players 5 cards, effectively soft restarting the game. So why did it get banned? Fiber Jar saw lots of play in stall strategies as arguably the best stall card of its era. It really didn't contribute to any mission or anything for that matter. It only caused tournaments to slow down. For this reason, banned back in 2005. Could this card come back? Yeah, but it shouldn't. Being a flip effect makes it very clunky. These don't and likely never actually resolve without some sort of card combo. But the fact that a card's sole purpose is to drag out games wouldn't be very helpful in the game or tournaments. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 5. Imperial Order was a continuous trap that, for the cost of 700 life points for your standby phases, prevented both players from using spell cards. Also, you could, at any point, choose not to pay the 700 life and destroy the card when you wanted to use spells. So why did it get banned? When Imperial Order was released, spell cards were by far the strongest card type in the game. Being able to lock your opponent out of using them was more than enough to ban this card. It was just an insult to you back off whenever you wanted to. If your opponent tried blowing up the Raigeki, flip up Io, and problem solved. No, but don't worry. You can turn it off to Raigeki your opponent's field on your turn. Could this card come back? Oh no! This is, without question, the strongest floodgate to ever hit Yu-Gi-Oh! While other floodgates might have higher highs like Sublimate or these guys, Io gets everything just enough to matter. Except for, like, super heavy. Pretend I didn't show the one super heavy samurai monster that does lose to Io. Surely they wouldn't test this card again. I mean, it's clearly too strong, right? Hold on for more. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 6, Imperial Order. Can I just cover this card? Oh, it got an errata. Oh, okay, cool. What does it do? Okay, you can't turn it off anymore. Alright, that's good, I guess. You pay during both standby phases. Okay, anything else? That's it. What the fuck? So why did it get banned? I mean, they definitely made the card worse now, since you actually have to play under the restrictions of your own floodgate, but it's still Imperial Order. It still shuts off a third of the cards in the game, and it also can just be activated after you set up your entire combo going first, which has little to no repercussions for the user. Could this card come back? Oh no! Imperial Order is currently the only card to ever be banned after receiving an errata to get it unbanned. So I think that alone should stand as a testament to how strong it is. Yeah, man, this card's insane. Follow for more. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 7, Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal. Beatrice is a generic rank 6 requiring 2 6s and has the relevant effect to send any card from your deck to the graveyard on a quick effect. So why did it get banned? Beatrice has been a problem card for a long time. Dumping any card from your deck is a pretty powerful effect, especially on an extra deck monster, and a generic one at that. This card was responsible for all sorts of war crimes, from more tame setups, to tier cards, the semi-transaction rollback, and the Mayakashi trap to prevent your player from special summoning for the turn, to dumping Snake Eye Ash to turn itself into full Snake Eye combo. Honestly, the only reason it was legal for so long was because rank 6s were just really hard to make. I mean, it took a generic meta rank 6 engine to finally get this card banned. Could this card come back? Oh no! Beatrice was made during an era where Konami thought it would be a fun idea to print insane cards like this, but make them really hard to summon. And guess what? All those cards have since gained ways to cheat them out and use their powerful effects in ways they were never intended to. Beatrice was just simply designed poorly. It was not future-proof in the slightest. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 8. Linkuriboh. Linkuriboh is a Link 1 monster that requires a level 1 monster's material and has 2 effects. You contribute it to reduce an attacking monster's attack to 0, and you contribute a level 1 monster to special summon itself from the graveyard. Both of these are quick effects, by the way. So why did this card get banned? Linkuriboh was just in the wrong place at the wrong time one too many times. He was used in Goki's U-Link boards, Gumblar's hand loops, Fireball Dragon's FTKs, and Snake Eyes for a turn setup. None of these were particularly Linkuriboh's fault, but it was, and still is, the most generic Link 1 that points down, and also has a positive effect. Could this card come back? Probably not. Link 1 monsters are dangerous in general, especially one this generic. That being said, Linkuriboh really isn't that strong by itself, and never really was the problem card in those awful decks. This one's a tough one, but it's probably the right choice to keep. No banned. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 9. Fiendsmith's Lacrima. Fiendsmith Lacrima is a level 6 Light Fiend fusion monster requiring 2 Light Fiends as material. On summon, it summons or adds another Light Fiend from grave or banishment, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you would shuffle back another Light Fiend from grave to burn the opponent for 1200. Why did this card get banned? Lacrima was a very pivotal piece in the Fiendsmith engine. Essentially, the engine allowed you to get a Link 2 and 2 level 6s on board. This could then be turned into Apollosa, Beatrice, Caesar, Promethean Princess, or really anything for that matter. Lacrima plus the Fiendsmith Engraver and Summon would be the 2 6s on board, and banning Lacrima meant that you either got 2 6s or a Link 2. Its burn effect was also very annoying due to how Yu-Gi-Oh's time rules work, and also it was a common. Other Fiendsmith cards were secret rares. Could this card come back? Eventually, yeah. Lacrima's ban was more of a Fiendsmith engine rather than an individual power, which basically means that once the Fiendsmith engine gets power crept out of the format, there won't be any reason to keep this guy banned. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 10. Ultimate Offering. Ultimate Offering is a continuous trap that, during either your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, you can pay 500 life points to normal summon a monster.
We don't have floor jump, but we do have the best shortcut.
Ultimate Offering lets you normal summon as many times as you want. So if you were to normal summon a monster that searches a monster on normal summon, that also searches a monster on normal summon, that all be how this card can get out of hand. This card was banned in 2013 for its synergy with the Gadgets, which were a series of monsters that search each other on normal summon. Will this card come back? Yeah, actually. I might have made this card sound crazy, but the fact that it's a trap card really holds it back. For a trap card to be viable in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, it must either be a very powerful, searchable form of interruption, insane amount of advantage by itself, or be a floodgate. Ultimate Offering can get you an insane amount of advantage, but you also need to draw the cards you want to normal summon. On top of that, if you want to use it on the opponent's turn, you can only summon during the battle phase, which is too late most of the time. It just leaves you waiting until your second turn before being able to use it. This card is just too slow for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And could definitely come back. Why are these Yu-Gi-Oh cards banned? Part 11. The Tyrant Neptune and Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom. These cards have a lot of text on them, but all you need to know is that they can copy the effect of a monster in your graveyard. Also, neither of them are hard ones returns. So why'd they get banned? FTKs, baby! These cards were used in various decks that intended to have them copy the effect of Leerless Independent Nightingale, then burn the opponent for gain. Nightingale is a soft once per turn effect that deals burn damage equal to its level times 500. Which normally isn't a problem since it's a level 1, but now when a level 8 or 10 monster is burning you, it hits much harder. Also, copying Nightingale's effect makes them unaffected by card effects, so you can't even negate them. Do these cards come back? Oh no! Cards that can generically copy effects are incredibly dangerous. Even if they couldn't FTK with burn effects, they'd still be usable in all sorts of unfun nonsense. Even today, people are tinkering with Phantom of Chaos to copy Sky Scourge nor Laris to fully handle your opponent. Cards have restrictions on them for a reason, and throwing those effects onto monsters with no such limitation is just way too powerful. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 12. Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. All you need to know about this guy is that if he is synchro summoned, he stops your opponent from activating cards on the field for the rest of the turn. So why did this card get banned? It's a really powerful floodgate. The only reason this card stuck around for so long was because there wasn't a consistent way to summon him on the opponent's turn. That was until the release of both the Centurion archetype as well as Crimson Dragon. Centurion is a deck that makes level 12 synchros, and Crimson Dragon is a level 12 synchro that can cheat out any dragon synchro monster. Did you know, it can cheat out King Calamity on the opponent's turn with shocking consistency. Did this card come back? Oh no! Now, Centurion was never a meta deck, but the fact that they could consistently bring out a turn skip floodgate was not helpful. As Yu-Gi-Oh progresses and makes old cards like this easier to summon, we need to stop and ban some of the cards that break it. King Calamity was never intended to be summoned this way, and rather than hitting Crimson Dragon, just a cool card, Konami decided to ban the Floodgate monster. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 13. Magical Scientist. Magical Scientist is a monster that, with low cost, 1,000 life points, lets you cheat out a level 6 or lower fusion monster. Not once per turn, by the way. So why did it get banned? Magical Scientist was used in Yu-Gi-Oh's first widely known FTK, first turn kill. In it, you would have Magical Scientist summon a whole bunch of monsters that would then be tributed by Catapult
I gave
Turtle
up trying
to burn
to
your
get
opponent
the
for
4
gain.
jump.
That's really all he was ever
Not
used for
worth it.
before getting banned in April 2005. Did this card come back?
No.
It should come to no one's surprise that summoning a whole bunch of monsters for basically free is a powerful effect. It's so powerful I didn't even mention the downside to it, and that the fusion monsters are returned to the extra deck during the end phase. It's widely considered that this is one of the most powerful cards ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Up there with the likes of Pre-Errata Chaos Emperor Dragon, Equal Choice, and Soul Charge. If allowed today, it would spawn even more FTKs than Firewall Dragon in its prime. Now, this card could never return. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 14. Butterfly Dagger Elma. Butterfly Dagger Elma is an equipped spell that gives the equipped monster 300 attack, and if it's destroyed while equipped to a monster, you can add it back to
I just love seeing you get good use out of my equipment. Thanks for the business.
Welcome to the Rooster Inn. Well, come back here whenever you're tired.
I guess Shaleka gets special treatment.
Look, welcome back, everyone. Is there anything else?
You can be a farmer when we get to Etrian Odyssey 3.
your hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Butterfly Dagger Elma was responsible for quite possibly the worst FTK known to man. It involved having both Royal Magical Library, which gained a spell counter each time a spell was activated and could remove 3 to draw a card, and Gearfried the Iron Knight, which destroyed any equipped spell equipped to it. You would then infinitely equip Butterfly Dagger Elma to Gearfried, which would in turn generate infinite counters on Royal Magical Library, which would allow you to draw your entire deck, at which point you could win in a multitude of ways. Could this card come back?
Yes.
This is quite possibly the worst card to still be on the ban list. This FTK was terrible back in 2005. Requiring 2 unsearchable normal summonable monsters was a recipe for disaster, and would be even worse in 2024. Maybe some deck could make use of an infinitely activatable spell, but I doubt that deck would be worth considering. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 15, Branded Expulsion. Branded Expulsion is a trap card that can tribute a fusion monster to summon 2 monsters from your grave or banishment.
one to your field and one to the opponent's. So why did it get banned? Being able to summon any monster to your opponent's field is very dangerous. There are many monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! That place restrictions on the player who controls them. Some are intentional, but many are not. One such monster was Giving Puppet Nightmare, with, when special summon, prevents you from summoning non-monsters. And since you're giving it to the opponent, you effectively block them out of special summoning for the turn. This was also very consistent and very easy to pull off. Did this card come back? No. There's a reason why cards like this are very rare. It's because being able to give the opponent anything is just way too powerful. Just ban Sanctifier and be done with it already, man. Tell me what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card banned? Part 16, Heavy Storm. Heavy Storm is a spell card that destroys all spells that trap Summon beat. So why did it get banned? Heavy Storm was a format warping card. Back when every deck was slow and played back row, Heavy Storm was required to disincentivize players from just setting 5 and passing. However, as the game sped up, trap cards needed to either be played in very high quantities or not at all. Since they often needed to commit more cards to actually stop their opponent, it left them wide open to being completely destroyed by Heavy Storm. For this reason, it got banned. Will this card come back?
Yeah.
Personally, I don't want Heavy Storm to come back. I feel that back row hate is already strong enough as is with stuff like Cosmic Cyclone, Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, and even Twin Twister. I don't see why we would want more blowout cards against trap decks. That being said, this card recently came back to one of both OCG and Master Duels, so it's very likely it will come back in the TCG as well. Also, the fact it can destroy your own cards is cute in decks like Unchained, but it's hardly the reason this card is still banned. How many cards do you want to see next? Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card banned?
It's a little too late to be regretting my choices now.
All you need to know about these cards is that they can all make tokens essentially for free. So why are they banned? Link monsters. That's it. Love them or hate them, Link monsters are a very pivotal part of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And they are the most generic extra deck type, in some cases only requiring 2+ monsters. These cards are responsible for many absurd Link boards and are partially what contributed to the community's negative perception of Links in general, alongside the abomination that was Master Rule 4. Could these cards come back? No. You just simply can't summon tokens without a restriction in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Mass token generation was so powerful, people even played Scapegoat, which locks you out of summoning for the entire turn because tokens were so powerful. With the amount of powerful Link climbing tools we have now, I shudder at the thought of being able to start your combo with a Gofu. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card banned? Part 18. Number S0, Utopic Zexal. Utopic Zexal is a rank 1 Xyz monster that requires 3 number Xyz monsters with the same rank as material. Then, on the opponent's turn, you can detach a material to prevent them from activating cards or effects for the turn. Fun. So why did it get banned? At release, this card was nothing more than a fun gimmick. A boss monster with an overpowered effect, but with an equally insane summoning condition. That was until the release of the Numeron archetype. Anyone who's played Master Duel should be familiar with this deck, but all you need to know is it's able to easily cheat out 4 number Xyz monsters, all with the same rank. You can see where the problem comes in. Could this card come back? No. This card is similar to Rongo Miniad, an absurdly powerful floodgate, sure, but it's really hard to summon. Though not out of the question. Even if this card came back without Numeron, there are definitely still decks that could easily turbo this card out. Yeah, I just neglected to mention the fact that you could also rank this up on top of any Utopia by discarding a rank-up magic. It wasn't super relevant for how it got banned, but, you know, another reason as to why this card can definitely not come back, because they're still making Utopia support. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card banned? Part 19. Number 42, Galaxy Tomahawk. Galaxy Tomahawk is a rank 7 Xyz monster that requires 2 level 7s as material, and it can attach 2 materials to summon as many tokens as possible. So why did it get banned? Any card that says summon as many monsters as possible is just asking to get broken. Tomahawk was no exception. Being a rank 7 meant that there really wasn't a good way to summon it, that is until the release of the Danger monsters. Nessie and Dogman are both 7s, so getting this guy onto the board all of a sudden became much easier. This card
what's the subtitle for this floor?
The deck would use Tomahawk to set up a board that could infinitely summon Grappa and tribute with Cannon Soldier to burn the opponent per game. This card come back.
Ahmed,
while yes, this
the
card
Sentinel
is
of
OCG and Master Duel
Eternity.
and sees very little play, this is
That's
primarily because
baller.
the best rank 7 deck, Kashtira, is severely crippled in both those formats. In the TCG where Kashtira is at full power, this card would be utterly insane. They have played Dracosack as sort of a
Place
Tomahawk
seems
light,
really
so they definitely
empty,
don't
though.
need the real thing.
What's
Comment
up
what
with
card you want
this?
to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card banned? Part 20. Mass Driver. Mass
What
Driver
the?
is a continuous spell that can tribute a monster to deal 400 damage to the opponent, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs! Not only was this responsible for the most consistent FTK in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, it is also currently the only FTK to ever win Worlds! It was called the Frog FTK, which involved using Substitute and Swamp Frog to send an insane amount of frogs to the graveyard. With enough frogs in grave, you could continuously summon Ronin Totem, tribute it for Mass Driver, then do it again until the opponent ran out of life points. Could this card come back?
No.
Mass Driver is a card that could only
Yeah, I'm
be
not
used
dealing
for
with two
degenerate
of you.
strategies. While summoning 20 monsters in one turn is difficult, it's not impossible, as seen with the Frog FTK. We see similar FTKs pop up more recently in 2018 with the Danger Darkhold FTK, only they used Cannon Soldier. And I don't say this very
let me
often, but the
go.
OCG actually had the right idea here, what with banning Amazon's Archer and the Cannon Soldiers. It's still crazy that those cards are legal. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned?
What's on your line?
Last Will. Last Will is a normal spell that, if a monster was
As usual, gotta kill fucking
summon any monster with 1500 or less attack
Veil
only once,
first,
thank
huh?
God. So why
Fuck
did it
you
get
too.
banned? This card was released in the
Game.
TCG's second ever product, the Yugi Structure Deck. And this card was great shortly after release when you were only summoning recruiters off of it. But it wouldn't be long before you could summon magical scientists from your deck for free. Then, a few years later, you could summon Cyber Sign or Rescue Cat, meaning that at any point, your opponent could just activate Last Will and OTK you out of nowhere. It was a broken card that worked very well with other broken cards. Could this card come back?
No.
This might be the hardest no yet. Last Will can summon any monster with 1500 or less attack, and I mean anything. This thing is E-Tally for pretty much any starter in the game. For example, it can summon any of the small Snake Eye monsters, Chundra, Genroku, and pretty much every Yubel monster. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 22, Fairy Tail Snow. Snow is a level 4 light spellcaster that can banish 7 cards from your hand, field, and or graveyard to summon itself from grave. This is a quick effect and not once per turn. Also, on summon, it sets an opponent's monster face down. So why did it get banned? Snow was actually banned twice. The first time was in 2019 because of Thunder Dragons. They had many ways to send a large amount of cards to the graveyard, and on top of that, they all have effects that trigger when banished. Snow was able to act not only as an interruption, but also get you an insane amount of advantage by banishing Thunder Dragons. Snow was later brought back in 2022, but was banned only 8 months later. This was because of its synergy with Chaos Ruler pile decks, as well as a little-known deck known as Tier Limit. You may have heard of it. Could this card come back?
Yeah.
Snow was unlimited in both the OCG and Master Duel. It is very powerful in those formats, but it isn't breaking the game by any means. It's not even that mill decks are bad, since decks like Horus, Tier, and Grass do exist. My theory as to why this is because summoning Snow multiple times is actually pretty difficult. I mean, she really isn't able to be used too much. Still a scary card, but I could see it coming back at some point. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 23, Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon. Chaos Ruler is a level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro with generic materials. On Synchro Summon, it activates 5 cards, adds 1 later Dark Monster among them, then mills the rest. Also, it can summon itself from the graveyard by banishing a light and dark monster from grave. So why did it get banned? A generic 8 that effectively draws 1 and mills 4? That's insane! This guy was a very powerful starter for many Wombo combo decks that wanted lots of cards in the graveyard. Though, what really pushed it over the edge was its synergy with Punks. Off a single E-Telly plus a discard, you could Chaos Ruler to mill 5, then overlay with a level 8 Punk to make Zombie Vampire and mill 4 more. Basically milling 9 off a single card. You'll never guess which deck made great use of this combo. Will this card come back?
Oh no.
Chaos Ruler does way too much for how easy it is to summon. Graveyard-focused decks have only gotten better since its ban, and any deck that could make it would. From Dragon Link to Horus to Lightsworn, these decks would absolutely kill for a mill 5 that could also be linked off twice. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 24, Union Carrier. Union Carrier is a Link 2 that requires 2 monsters with the same type or attribute as materials. It can target a monster you control, then equip a monster from your hand or deck to it with a matching type or attribute. So why did it get banned? Union Carrier was very clearly intended to be able to equip Union monsters from the deck, what with the name and the reference to Union Hanger, but this thing was responsible for one thing and one thing only, the Buster Lock. Basically, you would set up your board like normal, making sure to summon Warlord Savage Dragon, common that or piece at the time, but then blink off for Union Carrier to equip Savage with Buster Dragon Destruction Sword. While it's equipped to a monster, your opponent can't summon from the extra deck. So now your opponent has to play through your board without their extra deck. Could this card come back?
Oh no.
While Savage Dragon is now banned, it isn't hard to get a Dragon and or Dark Monster on your end board. And even if Dragon Buster was banned, Union Carrier is still basically Foolish Burial on a semi-generic Link 2. Just link off whatever you equip and boom. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 25, Tier Limit Kitkalos. Kitkalos is a fusion monster that requires both a Tier Limit and an Aqua monster as material. On summon, she adds or dumps a tier card, can send a card you control to the grave to special a tier monster from hand or grave, and if she's sent to grave by a card effect, mills 5. So why did it get banned? Tier was the most powerful Tier 0 deck we have ever seen, and it's not very close. And one of the main reasons this deck was so good was because of Kitkalos. With only the first part of her first effect, you could add Sheer and Arana for extension, Sully her Havness for interruption, or permanently combine with their second effect and mill 8. Not to mention you could also dump any name for a free summon of rule books. That's just the first effect, but there's already an insane amount of options, so hopefully this gets the point across of how busted she was. She was banned alongside the limitation of not only the 3 tier limit girls, but the Ishizu cards as well. Could this card come back? No. Tier has still topped events in the wake of Kiklos' ban. Decky's very much still playable, and while yes, they would love to have her back, they really don't need it. Also, we definitely don't need another Tier 0 format. Comment card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 26.
But she's hot.
Ancient Sentinel and Kelbeck the Ancient Vanguard. Both of these cards have the same relevant effect too, if they are sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, mill 5 for both players. So why'd they get banned? These cards are part of the Tier 0 Ishizu tier limit deck. They synergize incredibly well with the tier cards that not only have great ways of milling themselves, but also all have graveyard events. If you manage to mill Akito and or Kelbeck, the board would likely look like this. Another fun part about these cards is that they milled your opponent too. So you don't need to need any of your cards to stay in the deck, because it wasn't unlikely to have 10 cards milled off your deck before your turn started. Also, the fact that they were 4s that could theoretically summon themselves meant that they could also be half of an Abyss Dweller or a Bakuska. Could these cards come back? Oh, no. Tier is still very much around and is doing completely fine without them. Not to mention other mill decks have entered the format since, like Blightsworn and Horus. These cards should also just stay banned because of how annoying it is to have your deck milled against your will. Comment what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 27. Self-Destruct Button. Self-Destruct Button is a normal trap that can only be activated while your opponent has 7,000 more life points than you. All it does is make both players' life points 0, forcing a draw. So why did it get banned? It might be confusing why a card that only causes draws is banned, but it comes down to how tournaments are run. At official tournaments, you had 40 minutes to
God, that
your
is
best 2
not fair.
If time ran out before this and no player was ahead, each player would get 2 turns to attempt to win. If the game isn't over by then, whoever had more life points would win. Basically, you would play a deck that's sole purpose was to lower your life points to 1,000 or less just to activate Self-Destruct Button for 40 minutes straight. Once time was called, you would side in a bunch of life point gain or burn cards and just stall for 2 turns. This strategy was by no means meta, but it was disruptive enough to get Self-Destruct Button banned. Could this card come back? Oh, no. Time rules have actually changed to benefit Self-Destruct Button. Rounds do last 45 minutes now, but instead of each player getting 2 turns to win, the game ends at the end of the current phase. This means you can get cheese in time way easier, making Self-Destruct Button stalling even more obnoxious. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 28. Victory Dragon. Victory Dragon is a dark dragon with 2400 attack. It cannot be special summoned and needs 3 dragon monsters for its tribute summon. However, if this monster wins the game with a direct attack, you win the match. Not the duel, the match. So why did it get banned? For those unaware, in a competitive setting, Yu-Gi-Oh is played in a best-of-3 format. So if this card wins Game 1, you wouldn't play Games 2 or 3. This is obviously unfair, as it's not that hard to win Game 1 when using a gimmicky deck like Victory Dragon. It would summon a whole bunch of monsters while DNA surgeries on the field to make them all dragons, then attack the opponent for the match. Now, everything I said was true, except for the fact that in TCG, this was never happening. In the TCG, you are allowed to forfeit whenever you want, so when your opponent declares an attack with Victory Dragon, you can just concede and you'll only lose the duel, not the match. This caused uproars at enough tournaments and confused enough judges to get the card banned. Could this card come back? Oh, no. This card would suck, but there would definitely still be players who would try and force it, then get upset when the opponent scoops before they split for game. It promotes unsportsmanlike behavior and as such, should stay banned. Comment card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 29. Heavy Metal Pose Electromite. Electromite is a Link 2 monster requiring any 2 pendulum monsters as material, and on summon, places a pen monster in your extra deck face up. It can also destroy a card you control to add a face up pen monster from your extra deck to your hand, and when one of your cards is destroyed, you can draw 1. So why did it get banned? Electromite was created to help Pendulum transition into Master Rule 4, and wow, this card just does everything. It sets up your extra deck, effectively searches for any pen card, and also draws. There wasn't a specific combo that broke this card, but it was so powerful that every pen deck morphed into Electromite Turbo. It was so common and so over-centralized for the mechanic that it was eventually banned in 2020. Endymion and Pen Magician were also powerful decks at the time, so it was also a hit to those decks in specific. Could this card come back?
Yes.
Regardless of your opinions of Pendulum as a mechanic, they are severely underpowered in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Even with newer cards like Beyond and Exceed Pendulum existing, they struggle to play in the current format. Electromite is also completely equal in both the OCG and Master Duel, and Pen is still doing nothing there. Pen players have dealt with enough, so we can let them have this one card. Tell me what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 30. Try to plant Verte Anaconda. Verte is a generic Link 2 that can pay 2,000 life points to dump any fusion spell to copy and apply its effect. Then it locks you out of summoning for the rest of the turn. So why did it get banned? Verte was most often used to summon Red Eye's Dark Dragoon or later on Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. It was mostly relegated to being the best thing you could do with leftover bodies, or I just got hit with 3 hand traps and Verte is my only play. Verte was a fine part of the meta, but was by no means broken, until players discovered a very simple combo that would have Artifact Dagnus and Artifact Scythe, then have Verte summon DPE to pop the Scythe on the opponent's turn and lock them out of their extra deck. Could this card come back?
Yes.
Verte is no doubt a strong card, but with Scythe now banned, this card gets much worse. First off, it takes a minimum of 2 extra deck slots as well as 2 to 3 garnets in the main deck. You also need to use one of the 3 good fusion spells for Verte to copy, meaning the only decks that would play Verte would be fusion decks, which Verte was designed to support. Verte's niche now also has competition from the SP Little Knight and Scylla Hat Rabbit. They basically serve the same role as Verte, but with way fewer garnets. How many cards you want to see next? Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 31. Guard Dragon, LP, and Agripane. LP is a Link 1 dragon, and Agripane is a Link 2, both requiring 1 to 2 dragons as their respective materials. They both have the effect of summoning a dragon to a zone 2 or more Link monsters point to. LP summons from deck, and Agripane from extra deck. So why did they get banned? These cards were responsible for the first iteration of a deck we would come to know as Dragon Link, a deck that pretty much plays every good dragon card in existence. These two were responsible for so many degenerate combos and endboards that I can't possibly list them all. But the primary suspects were Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss off of Agripane as an Omni Negate, and Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon off of LP, who at this point had a soft once per turn effect to reborn a dragon monster. They helped contribute to the impossible to break boards that 2018 was known for. Could these cards come back? Oh no! These cards have only gotten better over time. Agripane can still summon Hot Red, but now also could summon Dispatter, Borland, or even Crimson Dragon for free. LP also has brand new targets, such as any Rocket, Bestial, or even Still DME. Comment what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 32. Premature Burial. Premature Burial is an equip spell that pays 800 life points to summon a monster from the grave and equip itself to it. And if either the monster or pre-mat are specifically destroyed, they both get destroyed. Not once per turn, by the way. So why did it get banned? This card was released very early on into Yu-Gi-Oh! A time when resurrection effects were at a premium. They represented a way to get big monsters onto the board for free. This card is a staple in Go format for this very reason, alongside Call of the Haunted as the premier revival cards. However, unlike Call of the Haunted, pre-mat has to specifically be destroyed to also blow up the equipped monster. This means that bouncing the card back to your hand allows you to reactivate the spell without destroying the equipped monster. This led to some crazy combos that obviously weren't intended, so the card was eventually banned in 2008. Could this card come back? No. This card would likely only be played in Infernoble Knights, Makonko, and not much else. I think this card should stay banned, but I will say that my opinion has softened quite a bit since it sold as banned. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 33. Fishborg Blaster. Fishborg Blaster is a level 1 water fish tuner that with the discard of a water monster can be special summoned from the grave as long as you control a level 3 or lower water monster. Not once per turn. The only restriction on this guy is that he can only be used as synchro material if the other materials are all water. So why did it get banned? This card was one of the best combo enablers for its time. This card saw lots of play alongside the Frog monsters to spam out lots of powerful synchros. It was played in Frog OTK, the primary enabler for said OTK, and later as an additional mode for Frog Monarch decks to let them OTK out of nowhere. They would use Blaster alongside another level 1 like Treeborn Frog to make Formula Synchron and Synchro Climb up into big boss monsters like Colossal Fighter and Shooting Star Dragon. This became a bit too consistent and powerful, so the card was banned in 2011. Could this card come back? No. Obviously this card is busted with Link monsters. You can guess that by just reading the card. But the main reason is that this card would absolutely break Mermail Atlantean. The deck's gimmick is that their monsters trigger when they are discarded for a water monster's effect. Blaster provides them with not only infinite Link material, but infinite discard fodder too. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 34. Ronin Toaded. Ronin Toaded is a level 2 aqua that can banish a frog from grave to reborn itself, not once per turn. Only restriction is that it cannot be used as synchro material. So why did it get banned? This card was the third piece of the Frog FTK. You specifically would send frogs to grave to fuel Ronin Toaded's continuous resurrections. However, despite both Substoad and Mass Driver's span, Ronin Toaded managed to avoid it. It continued to be a powerful rank 2 enabler at rank 2 decks like Paleo for many years, but the deck to finally break it was Sprite. Sprite is a deck that revolves around level, rank, and Link 2s, and was very powerful. The frogs were played as a supplementary engine that acted as extra Link material as well as a way to make Totally Awesome. Ronin alongside Swap Frog gave Sprite several extra bodies to not only start their plays, but to extend into huge endboards, which led to Ronin's ban. Could this card come back? No. Ronin's old partner in crime, Substoad, has since been unbanned. Both those cards are individually busted and should never be legal at the same time again. And I'd argue that Ronin would do so much more bad for the game than Substoad has since coming back. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 35. Outer Entity Azathoth. Azathoth is a generic rank 5 Xyz requiring 3 level 5s. It can also be ranked up on top of an Outer Entity Xyz monster, so Nyarla. It has the relevant effect that, on summon, stops your opponent from activating monster effects for the turn. So why did it get banned? It's a really powerful floodgate. Azathoth was first used in degenerate combo decks as a way to stop your opponent from hand trapping you. You would just overlay it on top of Nyarla, which is generic rank 4, and boom, no more hand traps. But what really broke this card was the Phantom Knight's Rusty Bardiche. The combo was to have Rusty set the Phantom Knight's rank up magic launch, which on the opponent's turn would be used on a Time Thief Redoer with no materials to summon Azathoth on the opponent's turn, stopping them from using any monster effect for the entire turn. Fun. Could this card come back?
Come on, just
For
let
whatever
me
reason,
get the
Konami decided to ban
shortcut
both
before I
Rusty
go to
and
bed.
the PK rank up spell to try and keep Azathoth legal in the past to no avail. This card is completely absurd because there there is zero counterplay once it hits the board. Comment what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 36, Tempest Magician. Tempest Magician is a level 6 synchro monster requiring a spellcaster non-tuner. On summon, she places a spell counter on herself, discard cards from your hand to play spell counters equal to the amount discarded, then finally she can remove all spell counters on the field to burn the opponent for 500 per spell counter. So why did it get banned? FTKs! This card was responsible for some shockingly consistent FTKs. However, on release, this wasn't the case. Spell counters as a mechanic were so underpowered that the thought of getting the 16 counters necessary to FTK was completely unreasonable. That was until the release of the Gun retrains and subsequent archetype. Now there exists a deck that accrues far more than 16 spell counters through its basic combo and could easily facilitate Tempest Magician. Overnight, the FTKs it enabled went from a 10% success rate to about a 95% success rate. Could this card come back? Oh no. This card serves no purpose aside from FTKs, and if Konami ever wants to print more cards that use spell counters, they'd have to think about this card too. Comment what card you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 37, Prank Kids Meow Meow Moo. Prank Kids Meow Meow Moo is a Link 1 requiring a level 4 or lower Prank Kids monster as material. And during your opponent's turn, if a Prank Kids monster would tribute itself to activate its effect, you could ban itself from the grave instead. So why did it get banned? Meow Moo's effect was pretty much irrelevant to its success. It was just a Link 1 that had Prank Kids in the name. All the Prank Kids main deck monsters have effects that trigger when they are using materials from or Link summon of a Prank Kids monster. In addition to this, they synergize very well with the new adventure engine. Access to an Omni-Negate for basically free. The deck was very powerful and got Meow Moo banned to basically cycle it out of the format. Could this card come back? Yeah. Meow Moo is really playable in Prank Kids, and Prank Kids, even at full power, wouldn't be a good deck in 2025. Their best case end board is pathetic by current standards. The only reason it's still banned, I assume, is because intern in charge of the ban list forgot about it. Comment what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 38, Mathmech Circuit. Not banned anymore. Mathmech Circuit was a level 4 light Cybers monster. Now a Mathmech monster can cause to summon itself from pain. Summon a Mathmech monster while you control it, it searches a Mathmech spell and trap. Only restriction is that you can attack one monster for the rest of the turn. So why did it get banned? Circular basically turned the entirety of the Cybers type into a one-card thing. One card by itself can get you in line with access to the power. One restriction thanks to update humor. Going first, it set up Heat Soul plus Super Factor Roll for 2 draws plus a Trishula that's also in a game. That's with one card. I don't have time to talk about all the infinite Cybers extensions. Circular just homogenized an entire monster type, and while sometimes
how can you not flee? The opponent was stunned.
This one definitely aged well. Circular is a card that can only age well. Until the card is released that manages to do even more than Circular does, it's gonna stay banned for the foreseeable. Tell me what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 39, Topologic Gumblar Dragon. Topologic Gumblar Dragon is a generic Link requiring 2+ effect monsters. If a monster is summoned to a zone of Link 2, discard up to 2 cards from your hand to force your opponent to do the same. Also, during your main phase, this card is extra linked with extra monster zones by a chain of arrows. Perform the first effect, but only your opponent discards. You only use one of these effects per turn. So why did it get banned? The more I read this card, the more upset it makes me, because there was a definite attempt to try and balance this card. So Link 4 that does nothing by itself requires you to discard as well, and you can only use one effect per turn. At the same time, this card was released with Doki at full power. Fireball Dragon, Isolde, and the Nightmares were all used to facilitate a pseudo FTK that would Link, rip 2 cards on your turn, then summon to a zone and Link points on the opponent's turn to rip 2 more. Fun.
You Link.
Not much to say here. Gumblar was a horrendous design mistake that I hope Konami never tries to retread. Comment what cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 40. Maxi. Maxi is a monster that can be discarded on either turn to allow you to draw 1 card every time your special summons. Why did it get banned? Maxi is actually a very old card released in 2011. Its initial purpose being to counter heavy combo decks by delaying them for a turn. Funny enough, this niche wasn't good enough for Maxi to see consistent play for several years. It took until around 2016 for Maxi to become a household name. The game had stood alongside it the need to special summon. To the point where every deck needed to special summon multiple times per turn to perform any sort of combo. There became a common joke of taking the Maxi challenge. Basically meant you tried to set up a board so strong it didn't matter how many cards they had, or special summon 35 plus times to make your opponent deck out. Of course, both these options were very situational and very practical. Maxi proved too powerful and would eventually be banned in 20. Will this card come back? Oh no! Maxi is a very hotly debated card, but at least in the TCG, it's pretty safe to say this card is never coming back. Konami has released the full charming, which are just restricted Maxis, so why bother releasing the real thing? Come on, cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 41, number 95, Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon. Dark Matter Dragon is a rank 9 Xyz monster requiring 3 level 9s as material, though you always use an alternative condition of ranking it up over a Galaxy Eyes Xyz monster. On summon, it sends 3 dragons to grave for cost to make your opponent banish 3 monsters from their deck. not once per turn by the way, also can detach my shield to attack twice. So why did it get banned? I have no clue what they were thinking when they released this card. A card that can be ranked up on top of the generic rank 8 that built 3 dragons for cost, and it can OTK into an open board by itself. This card famously got the Dragon Rulers ban all the way back in 2015, but that's not why it got banned. It managed to stick around until 2019 when it got banned due to being an integral part of the Gandora FTK. It would have Eclipse Wyvern, a way to banish it, usually Tempest, and another dragon. This, alongside LP and pre-router Red MD, allow for a very consistent FDK using Gandora X. Fun, could this card come back? Oh no! Despite how funny it would be to resolve this card against Malice, this card could never come back under any circumstances. Dumping 3 dragons with, for cost, up the generic ranking is way too powerful and way too abusable. Come on, cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 42, Isolde, 2 Tales of the Noble Knights. Isolde is a Link 2 requiring 2 warrior material. On summon it searches a warrior, then you can't summon it or use its effects this turn. And it can summon any warrior from deck by spells level. So why did it get banned? Isolde was toxic in 2 major ways. First off, the way it was most often summoned was with Nectar, which would summon Aqua Dolphin, which ripped any potential hand trap from your opponent. Second, and this is the big one, it summoned any warrior from the deck. Main targets were Infernoble Everdon or Armageddon, both of which led to some insane boards. The chart's rap sheet is so long, I can't even begin to describe it, but here are some of the highlights. Obviously, Isolde is an integral part of Infernoble and handling shenanigans. Its upland Dark Warrior, which could be pulled into unfair ways, and its final crime was being part of Exodia FTK. Could this card come back? Oh no! This is one of the most degenerate combo enablers you have ever seen, up there with the likes of Halcyon and Auroradon. It blows my mind that this card is still legal in Master. How about cards you want to see next? Why is the Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Number 43. Number 89, Diablos is the Mind Hacker. Diablos is generic rank 7, requiring 2 7s as material. It has the relevant effect of attachment shield to your opponent's extra deck with the banished card. Now, also, if an opponent's card is banished face down, you can banish card off the top of their deck face down. Now they already have.
Let's go see what the boss looks like before we go.
2017 saw 0 play. The average player wouldn't be able to get the card until 2021, but played it until 2023 with the full release of the Kashtira archetype. Kashtira are a bunch of level 7s that love to banish cards face down, and they love this card. Throughout the standard Kashtira combo, you banish 3 to 4 cards off your opponent's deck. Diablos can banish 1 fortune, then banish 4 to 5 cards, beating your opponent with start their turn with 1 to 2 cards out of their extra deck, or zones locked, and the top 8-9 cards of their deck banish face down, and they'd be under a Rise Heart. Also, the moment they trigger any Kashtira effect, you lose another 10 cards off their deck. Fun. Could this card come back? Oh no! As long as specifically Kashtira Rise Heart and Shaker Hero exists, this card cannot come back. A deck that's sole purpose is to pseudo FTK you by not letting you play at all. Come on with cards you want to see next. Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 44, Kashtira Arise Heart. Arise Heart is a generic rank 7 requiring 3 7s as material, though it can also be ranked up over any Kashtira monster providing Shangri-La's effect was used successfully. Here I misspoke. Shangri-La's effect doesn't actually have to be successful, it just has to be active. So as long as the activation wasn't negated, you can still rank up Arise Heart. Effects include attaching a banished card to itself anytime a card is banished, not once per turn, and is also mandatory, and you can attach 3 materials to banish a card on field face down. Oh, and it's also macrocosmos. So why did it get banned? Arise Heart was a game-warping card for the entire time it was legal in the TCG. Every deck needed to have an out to this card or be able to play under it if they wanted to stand a chance. And this only included select few decks because, believe it or not, most decks need the graveyard. People played all sorts of bad cards just because they could out Arise Heart. Arise Heart turned every game it was summoned into a game of better draw the out, because if you did out it, it wasn't coming back. It led to a very stringy format that was very reminiscent of stuff like 2020's Buster Lock. Could this card come back? Oh no! Arise Heart is kinda like Mystic Mind, an incredibly powerful and annoying card that usually ended on its own, but in paired form would mostly just get out immediately. Despite this, having to dilute your deck space just to fit unsearchable outs and floodgates is not fun. How about cards you want to see next? Why is this Yu-Gi-Oh card banned? Part 45.
Okay.
Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon. Auroradon is a Link 3 that requires 2 plus machines. Once summoned, it makes 3 tokens and stops you from Link summoning for the turn. Then tribute 1 monster to pop a card, 2 monsters to summon a Mecha Phantom Beast from deck, or agree to add a trap to the grave. So why did it get banned? This card is absolutely cracked. It made it so any way to summon Christian Conquer Fire recommended as a Baron, Savage, and Herald. And that's not counting any potential ways to extend further.